Welcome everyone to the work session August 14th, 12 noon, right in the middle of the day. Call to order, that's me. Second thing on the agenda is OBKY final report. We'll welcome A-plus leadership to the podium. Please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mayor. David Johnson, 439 Maple. I guess, Mayor, the first reports to start the presentation, it was interesting last year when we started with all the volunteers, is they expect things to happen really fast. And we explained that this would be a process and that government is slower than the private sector. So here we are almost 12 months later, and we finished the process and we're ready to start moving forward. And Fred and I have met with Leland several times, and we're ready to transition, and Fred will talk a little bit about some of the things that we're going to get on right out of the gate. But first, I'd like to thank on behalf of us and all of you, the 400 plus citizens who helped us. They volunteered their time, many of them more hours than we could have ever expected. The department heads, especially Amanda and Rogers and Wayne and Angela, for the time and energy they put into it, because it's not any fun when people start looking at you from outside and inspecting what you do and picking things apart and being critical. They were the consummate professionals. Some of them even more so than we probably should expect of them, because some people got a little pointed with things that they shouldn't have. They handled them like pros. The committee chairs we want to thank, because they probably devoted as much time as anyone, is Sim Davenport, Kirk Kirkpatrick, Chris Caslin, Amanda Rogers chaired the parks, Joe Berry, Andrew Howard, and Dr. Tom Maddox. And we want to especially thank you all on behalf of all the citizens. I know you weren't there and you weren't part of it, so you didn't see, but they were very grateful to be asked and part of a process to move forward. They understood we were going through tough economic times, but they were very appreciative that as a group you want to move forward and continue growing as a city. And finally, before I turn it over to Fred, thank all the city staff. They helped us with so much stuff, but also the chamber, because they were a partner in this. They provided us people and places to do things and a great deal of data that we didn't have. So with that, Fred, I think I'll let you tell them where we are and where we're going.
Fred Reeves, 3520 Ashlawn Drive. I'll be brief because I know y'all have a lot to do today, but there are a few things I wanted to mention. First of all, this was a very dynamic process. It's probably the most fun project and the most interesting project that David and I have done since we've been working together. And especially to see the excitement among the people that participated. We have people out there right now waiting to start. One of my favorite people to work with is Laura Ruth Edge. Laura Ruth and I text at least once a week. She knows when we're going to start painting some walls down there. So we have groups that are ready to go, and we're excited about that. We're very excited that Leland's going to be working with this process. Leland was on one of the committees and was a very strong participant. And Leland, I think, is very strongly committed to the project. So Leland, we're pleased to have you do this, and we feel very comfortable handing it off to Leland. You know, when we first started, we didn't realize where's it go after this, but the fact that Leland's taken it on, and Leland is excited about it, and also Nate has been very supportive of it, and so we feel like there's going to be some things done. Will everything get done? No, but a lot of things will get done. A lot of things have already been done too by outside groups. The Chamber's taken on some initiatives, the CVB has taken on some initiatives, some individual folks in the community have taken on some initiatives. But the three things that we think probably, just to kind of give you an idea of what may kind of get it started and kicked off, it'll be visible. The three things we think that'll probably get started first and foremost is what we're calling the Mayor's Mile. A lot of people like to walk, but a lot of people like to walk and know how far they've walked. So as we're developing the downtown, the Smothers Park area more and expanding westward, we'll set up what's called a Mayor's Mile, and Wayne Shelton will be putting together some symbols and some signs where you'll start from the Holiday Inn, or you'll start from the Hampton Inn, or you'll start from the Convention Center. And if you start here and you follow these directions, when you get back to where you started, you've walked a mile. Because a lot of people do like to actually measure where they're walking. The entertainment district, we understand the city attorney is probably working on that as we speak. That is very, very important for a community our size, to have a place where folks can have a nice event. They can enjoy a beverage outside and not be threatening, or not be threatened, that they could just enjoy it with understanding. You We're not looking to tolerate a bunch of drunks outside for sure, and we won't have that. The experience with this, you don't have that with these. But folks like to walk up and down the street. Maybe, the Miller House might have an event. They'd like for people to be on the sidewalk or in the parking lot, or up at Bar Louie might like to have something. So the entertainment district will be very, very important. And the thing to understand about that is it's very specific geographically, and it's very specific within that geographic site. You will apply for a permit to do this, and that permit will restrict you're on the sidewalk from this point to this point, from this hour to this hour. So it's not just an open walk down the street with your container in a plastic cup or whatever. Then the downtown arts, like I said, we've got a couple of committees that are really excited about doing some neat things downtown. You may have gone to some cities before where they have like picture spots, but where you go to a particular building on the side, they got a place where you stop and have your picture made. So they're interested in some things like that. They're looking at that really neat space under the bridge downtown. What could we do there to make that a really kind of a neat place? So these groups are ready to go. I think Leland's ready to go, and we're ready to go home because we've spent a year doing this. We've enjoyed every minute of it. And Mayor, we thank you for asking us to do this. It's been one of the most exciting things we've done. Thank you for your foresight. Commissioners, thank you for your support. And we'll be happy to take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, we'll let you go to the next item.
Okay, Steve, can you give us an update on the entertainment district?
Oh, at this particular time, we have not started the regular.
Mike.
Oh,
The mic,
I'm
so
sorry.
we can hear you.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We did, earlier this summer, we did have a meeting with the folks that are with the Kentucky Alcoholic Beverage Commission. They came down, took a tour of the downtown area, and gave us a very favorable report on being able to have or set up to do, as he was saying, about being able to walk downtown with a beverage in hand. What remains to be done is for us to basically file a ordinance and pass that within the city commission. And I think we are kind of looking at wanting to do this sometime in the early part of next year as one of the first.
Okay. City Manager Nate Pagan.
Thank you, Mayor. As luck would have it, excuse me, the next item on the agenda actually pertains to that very issue. It's funny how that works out sometimes. So, and that presentation will be from Tim Ross, who's kind of been coordinating those efforts on our end. But as the city attorney referenced, we did have a very productive meeting with the state ABC, I believe in April. And so they were very receptive to the proposal that we were putting forth, or our interpretation of state law. So I do feel it's something that's definitely realistic, probably for implementation by the next year, next festival season in early 2019.
So it's going to take that long, huh?
Well, as the city attorney referenced, we have to pass an ordinance, and then once we pass the ordinance, we submit an application to the state. And so by the time we get the state permit, and then I believe Tim will probably have some work to do with the various vendors downtown to determine. And again, he'll speak to this.
Okay, well, let's let him speak to it then.
Oh, okay.
Does it suit you?
Yeah, it does.
Can I ask Brett a quick question here?
Please.
In your document, I think it's on page 1, you have a reference to pass a fair ordinance.
A fairness
Give me a little,
ordinance.
just a little deep. Okay, what is
Yeah,
it?
fairness ordinance.
Okay, well, how does that, okay, underneath it, it says address homeless issue in Owensboro, develop and implement an anti-litter beautification campaign. A fairness ordinance is more like allowing diversity, promoting rights for gay and transgender.
Correct.
Are those 3 separate issues?
Yes,
Was that
3
the
separate
intention?
issues, yes.
Okay, it looks like there's subpoints
Yeah.
underneath that
No,
heading.
there's 3
Okay,
separate issues.
I'm good.
yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
fairness ordinance,
Right.
not fair ordinance. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm cool. All right, thank you. Mayor, thank you.
Welcome. Anybody else have anything for Dr. Reeves? Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
sir
Mayor.
and ma'am. Candace Breaks here. She was a big part of that as well. Okay. What time's the tea time, David? Is it? 20 minutes. 20 minutes, I got you. Okay. Next item on the agenda, the aforementioned Tim Ross is going to enlighten us on the entertainment district.
Thanks, Mayor. Commission, as Steve was explaining, we have met with the state ABC folks, and I just wanted to provide an update for the commission. Nate and I have met numerous times about this, and I know we talked about it at commission meetings several months ago, and the goal that we would be meeting with the ABC folks. So we just wanted to give a general update about what those conversations were with the ABC and kind of refresh what the limitations are currently. I know when we talk to different groups, there's different perceptions about what's allowed and what's not allowed and what those parameters are. So I wanted to run through those because we did the exact same thing with the state ABC folks to make sure that we were on the same page and talking the same language with what the general goal of the commission would be, to allow a little bit more flexibility than what had been allowed previously. So currently, the way that the regulations are, either you can get a temporary liquor license that would allow alcoholic drinks on a public space within a defined premise, or you could have an EDC license. And so numerous people over the years since I've been here have done a temporary liquor license like the OSO did, where they would set up their White on Second event right along 2nd Street, and they have a defined premise, and drinks are allowed within that space. Normally they wouldn't be because it's a public area, but once they fill out that temporary license for that particular date and times, you can have drinks within that area. And so there's a map that showed their application for that temp license was just on 2nd Street, right in front of their property. Every year the barbecue festival, and folks think that it's this large street festival, which it is, but yet the temporary license that they fill out is just for the area there at McConnell Plaza. So all the alcoholic beverages that are sold for that festival are contained within that space where they've got music that plays. Friday After 5 is another event that we reference quite a bit with the open containers. And so, as everyone knows, they've got multiple music stages. On the east side at the River Park Center on the patio, as well as the courtyard and several spaces. Then they use the overlook stage at the north end of Frederica Street, as well as the pier. So the entire riverfront that they utilize, the challenge is that the current regulation says that an NQ2 or whatever permanent license they've got, as highlighted in yellow, you can't take the drink from that premise off into common space or public space. The River Park or Convention Center Spectra has a separate liquor license, so a drink can't cross between those two premises. And as we look at our riverfront, as businesses continue to expand, with whether it's Lure or the VFW or numerous other ones, the temporary license does not allow a person to purchase a drink from one of those license holders and walk out into the common space. So what we went and approached the state with was, could we potentially make our entire downtown an EDC, an entertainment destination center? Previous regulations wouldn't allow it, but they revised those this past year, and so the state ABC board said yes. Based on the parameters that you've told us and that we talked through that day, they said that they would look favorably to give us that downtown EDC license. The cost for the city to apply for that license is listed there, about $2,500 for the year for that annual license. And then so we as the city would own that EDC premise, if that makes sense. So essentially we could define what the boundaries are for our downtown EDC to make it as wide or deep or big or small as we want it. We did talk to the state ABC folks about a few nuances within that space, one being the playground in Smothers Park, that at least the goal of the commission in previous conversations is that we wouldn't want to have open containers in the middle of the slides and the swings with the little kids in the playground. So they said, yes, you can certainly carve out that space. Even so, if your EDC is everything in that blue space, truly you could carve out the parking garage or the playground space and have little areas within that open containers are not permitted.
Excuse me, Tim.
Yes,
Who's
sir.
going to make that decision?
As far as what areas within that would be,
who's
that'd
going
be
to carve it?
yeah, we could carve it out, but it'd be based on the commission and what direction from the commission.
And what is the liability for the city when they take out that license? Did they talk about that?
Well, it's the city's liability because we now own the license for that space. We have talked to our insurance with Kentucky KLC, and they said we wouldn't have any additional premiums with it because we as the city are not actually selling any drinks within that space. So the majority of that liability from the insurance side then falls back on whoever's actually selling those drinks.
So if you leave Colby's with a drink, you get in a fight on the way to the convention center, that's between Colby's and the convention center.
That was the
Generally
interpretation, and that may,
speaking.
generally speaking, yes,
That's
because
the
they're the ones
argument
that
that I
sold
would
them that
make.
drink.
Pardon me?
That's the argument I would make as city attorney.
What would that be?
That it's just between Colby's and the.
I mean, is that law? Is that, or is that, are we assuming that?
That's what we're basically assuming that. Like I said, that's a position that I would take. I don't know exactly what the courts would say as to that.
So there's no real
ultimately.
written statute on
No,
this?
no.
Yeah, it's a little bit open-ended, but the basic premise, and we talked, there's, as Nate was saying, there's a lot of logistics that goes into it with how we would implement this and numerous logistics pieces. But one of the things that we had asked the state about was if we created all of the downtown, and I say all with air quotes, but if the majority of the downtown space is in EDC, can we as the license holder determine when and where we allow the open containers within that space? The thought process being we could do it on a case-by-case basis, right? So if Bar Louie and OZ Tyler and Mellow Mushroom decide to do a block party on 2nd Street from, whatever the parameters of the streets are from St. Anne down to Frederica Street, we determine what the parameters of that special event application are, that we would allow drinks on the common space is what it's referred to in an EDC license, because we own the streets and the sidewalks, that we could determine when and where the open containers would be allowed. And they said, yes, certainly. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be just a blanket, you can have drinks anytime, all the time, 24/7, but we can determine when and where we allow that as the license holder. We would be required to have a separate license with each establishment inside the EDC that sells drinks. So just like if you go to 4th Street Live, the EDC license holder has a separate agreement with every restaurant or bar within that space that would allow them to have their patrons that bought a drink on their premise walk out into the common space, if that makes sense. And that's some of that protection with the liability on the insurance.
Mayor, if it could add just briefly to that, as a part of the ability for a provider to take part in this, we certainly as the city would require them to basically sign an agreement in which they would provide their own liability insurance and would name the city as an additional insurer. We'd also require that they hold us harmless and indemnify us in the case of an accident. That's a kind of a routine thing that we add in contracts with outsiders. But I just thought I'd throw that out there as well.
Yes,
Go ahead, sir. If you
Commissioner
want to
Glenn.
ask a question first. that's
Help
fine.
yourself.
Question I've got is, can we go back, and I know you will, Steve, in your due diligence, and also you, Tim, but I would encourage you to go back and look at there's two entertainment districts, right? I know Louisville, and what's the other one, Newport? Is it Newport on the Levee?
On the levy, I
Okay.
believe, is the.
See what their experiences were with any incidents. I think that'll give you an idea how the courts rolled. Number two, you've talked about you're both saying they're going to sign a contract to participate, to be able to let their pay. How are we going to enforce that? Is there going to be an OPD function? Or are we going to have somebody from ABC do it? I mean, we don't want the bad publicity of all of a sudden, I open up Joe's Bar and I don't do what Steve is saying. I don't fill out the paperwork, but I've still got people walking out doing whatever.
Yeah, that would be ABC's enforcement of that, because ABC enforces them as their permanent annual liquor license. So if they're not abiding by their annual, the parameters set forth by their license, then they would be cited by ABC for that. And ABC does come down, they don't give us a schedule of when they do, but if it's a temporary license or the permanent license, they do random checks with all the establishments. And if we had an issue or concern with somebody, we would certainly let ABC, the state ABC office know, and then they could go back and follow up with them on that. And there's actually 3 different groups that currently have the EDC, Newport on the Levee, 4th Street Live, and then there's a new, Nate, what's the term of that new place in Lexington? I put like a new entertainment, like a retail
Lifestyle
center.
center, just shopping
Lifestyle
center in Lexington, yeah.
Yep, that has it, and that's a little bit more open parameter. With us doing it downtown, it's a little bit of a precedent, I would say, because the majority of the ones is a defined retail space that you're walking onto their premise. I'm entering into the shopping complex, the restaurant complex, whereas our downtown would be different. As far as the parameters for entry and exit points and just the size of that space. But based on the current guidelines with ABC, they said we meet the requirements that we could, secure that license.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is just I don't want a black eye for the city if we had an incident.
Certainly.
Right?
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
maybe 4 years ago, I brought this to the attention of Ed Ray and then City Manager Bill Parrish, and my thought is that traveling from city to city and seeing other places having this kind of a venue, and then with Owensboro, the way we're situated with the convention center and 2 hotels on either side of it, people were leaving the convention center and couldn't even walk back to their own hotel with a beverage that they had purchased from the convention center, you know, having to throw away a $8 drink or whatever because they came outside. And so I'm glad to see that there's someone else within this OBKY study that thought that this was something that also should have been done, because we've been working on this for a long time. And I just think that with anything, people are going to be responsible, or they're going to have to be responsible, because it doesn't have to be because they're walking from venue to venue that something would break out, because it breaks out inside of venues all the time. Oh.
Yeah, that way everybody.
Well, I was talking to you.
I know.
But anyway, I just don't think that it's, I know it's important that we make sure that the citizens are safe, but they still have problems inside individual venues, not because maybe they're walking outside of that venue, because there are problems inside of Bar Louie, inside of Kobe's, inside of whatever. And so, you know, those things just happen, and it's, I don't know that you can control it. You know, once folks start drinking, you don't know what's going to happen. So,
Thank you. Tim, are you in consult with, like, what are you, chief, lieutenant chief? The police department on how this is going to be
Lieutenant Chief.
managed? Because it seems like it could be a little difficult to monitor. So I assume you all are working together on trying to figure out the best way to manage that.
Yes, and a lot of that depends on direction from the commission as to how we would do it. So, and I can answer that question. Yes, we've been in communication,
Okay,
and there's a couple
good.
different scenarios for it. And we've had numerous conversations with some of the downtown businesses and with Spectra and the River Park Center, some more, some less, but in generally, all of the downtown restaurants are supportive of some more flexibility in the language that would allow drinks to come and go from their premise. Now, depending on which one you talk to about drinks coming onto their premise and time of day and for every event, or if it's every night, so it's different. But that's why we need some general direction from the commission so we can proceed a little bit farther and kind of vet out some of those logistics about how do we implement that from a messaging standpoint to the public, as well as from whether it's law enforcement or logistics.
So the issue, like you leave the River Park Center, and all of a sudden you have to go to the bathroom, so you want to stop in Kobe's and go to the bathroom. I can see that could be an issue for their patrons, as people might have had more than one.
Sure.
Now they're wandering around in a restaurant needing to go to the restroom. So I'm just, yes, sir.
And Tim,
Send
correct
that.
me, but as I understand, the individual establishments can opt in or opt out. So Colby's, for example, has an NQ2 license that allows them to sell by the drink. And so they could opt in to this district and allow people to leave and enter Colby's, or Colby's could say, nah, we don't want to participate, and keep their individual license, but then patrons could not enter or exit Colby's with a drink. So it's up to each individual establishment in addition to the boundaries, but then all the various establishments within the boundary can opt in or opt out.
It seems more of a compliance issue than you really are accounting for, but I can see that would be a problem. You know,
Yeah, certainly
half a dozen
potentially.
guys go from one place to the convention center, and all they're going to do is use the restroom, and then turn around and leave. That can get a little onerous too. So we will have to do some serious messaging and look at the compliance of how we're going to be able to monitor this.
No doubt. And so I had a couple scenarios here that I
Okay.
just wanted to kind of talk through to give you some scenarios that we've tried to look at internally with potentially how this could be implemented. So in this example, weekly concert series, we'll take Friday After 5 as an example. You know, we, as the city, could determine our EDC, if we want to allow Friday after 5 to have open containers up and down the riverfront, as Commissioner Smith-Wright was referencing, that folks could, purchase a drink at the pier and stroll down the riverfront and go to those different establishments. But each of those that are highlighted in orange or red there within the yellow space would all have to have an annual license agreement or a per event license agreement with the city that would allow those drinks to come out onto the common space. And that ensures our safety, that we make sure that they've got the right liability insurance and they're naming the city additional named insured, so it gives us some liability coverage from those different establishments. And so that would be a weekly concert series, whereas what I referenced before, if Mellow Mushroom and some of those wanted to do a block party, essentially the city would step in, they'd come to my office for a permit like they do with any special event that they wanted to host, and they would sit down with us and say, we want to do a block party on this date at this time, and here's the kind of perimeter or the space that we would like to use. And so we would meet with street department, fire, police, and assess what the date is, what the times are, what the style of the event is, to determine what security would be needed, define the perimeter, entry access points of where signage needed to be, or toters needed to be to throw away, their drinks before they left that premise. So there's several different ways that you could do it if you do it on a case-by-case basis. And we feel that if you do it on a case-by-case basis, it limits some of the city's liability of drinks entering in the space, to ensure that they're buying them from downtown businesses and not bringing their own drinks and coolers and backpacks that are, piled with things. So that is a challenge to it, that if the commission's direction was, we want to make every Friday from 5 p.m. to midnight and every Saturday from 5 to midnight you can come and go with drinks, well, then the onus would be back on the city to ensure that folks, from a liability standpoint, that folks aren't coming into the area dragging coolers or big giant bags and bringing who knows what drinks or what quantity of drink, because that's not really helping any of the downtown businesses, because they're, they want to sell drinks with their food. If we do it on a case-by-case basis, then the onus is back on that event organizer to ensure that messaging is out there and some of the security staffing costs and things like that. So I know Chief Elam shared some concern before that if we did it on an open containers at a certain days and times, that he would have to increase the amount of staffing that he's got patrolling the downtown area just to ensure some of that safety, at least for a time, to see if there are any issues that come up.
Plus public works, plus sanitation.
Right. Certainly additional services with that. Whereas if we focus more on the case by case, so if Friday After 5 wanted to allow it, then Friday After 5 would add that to their annual event application. And then we as a city would assess that and say, if you're going to allow open containers, we're going to require X amount of additional police officers plus X amount of volunteers at those entry and exit points to ensure the drinks aren't, coming and going freely type of thing.
I remember that thing on Griffith Avenue, what did they call it? The Porch Fest.
Mm-hmm.
And they originally wanted to block the street, from one end, from Freeman to Frederick, I guess it was. And they had to get permission from the residents, and they kind of acquiesced, a little bit.
Right.
And because they would like to get in and out of their property. So do you anticipate, it's hard to anticipate, 5-block thing, and all of a sudden, what's the percentage of the people that don't want to have that happen versus how you decide on you're going to have it happen? Does that make any sense?
It does a little bit, and a couple of them are two different scenarios. The one with Porch Fest is in a residential neighborhood, so that requires from the business resident or the residential, if it's a certain style of event, then you need the buy-in for those residents. Whereas if it's in the downtown commercial district, and the event organizer wants it, and all the city departments and the city manager think it makes sense to do an event because of whether or not it's quality of life for the local community or a visitor experience, with a large signature event, that we can close that road without the buy-in of each individual business. So if the event organizer came and said, we want to host a block party on Labor Day weekend because we think it's going to help X amount of businesses downtown, then we as a committee would look at that and say, yes, we think it makes sense, and get city manager's approval for that. So we wouldn't need the buy-in of the individual businesses to set up the event. It's just the individual businesses that sell alcoholic beverages would need to have that agreement to participate and allow their patrons to come and go.
And what about the ones that don't sell alcohol? Are they just going to close, or?
It would be up to them, but alcoholic beverages still wouldn't be allowed on their premise.
I'm not trying to nix it. I'm just
Oh, no, I understand.
wandering around. And
No, and that's what we've had dozens and dozens of conversations where we sit in a room and we look at numerous events and play different scenarios. What if this? What if that? What's the implication of these different things? And we're certainly not going to be able to vet all of them before we make a decision to move forward, but we're trying to vet as many as possible, different scenarios.
Bob, I'll just a second.
No, you're fine.
I got
just
you.
now put my hand up. You take your time.
Go ahead, Tim.
No, that's all I had. We're
Commissioner
trying to
Glenn.
vet as many things as possible.
Commissioner Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
Given all that you're saying, that, you're going to probably, like any new project or program, you're going to have things you're going to tweak and adjust. Would the state allow us permission to do a beta testing process, maybe try it for a weekend or a couple of weeks, and then be able to go back as your committee would and assess, okay, this worked, this didn't work, we need to fix this, we definitely don't want to do that. Is that feasible under the legal standards the state applies for these districts?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I would have to ask them that.
Okay.
My initial inclination would be is that we would apply for the annual license,
Right.
and then we could determine event by event. And so we, as the city, would just say, for the first event that wants to do that, hey, here's the parameters that we think make sense and work for this, and then we evaluate it afterwards to see what worked or didn't work. So, but to do it on a beta test for that EDC area, I don't know if they'd.
Well, you're saying an event would be fine. Where you have a period where you try it once for a limited period of time, probably in a limited geographic area, and then you assess how it went. Because anything like this, you're going to find things that go wrong, and it may take minor. But when we're dealing with police and fire and sanitation and all our city services, that's where the rubber meets the road. We do not want to create a crisis for them where all of a sudden something happens and they can't patrol the rest of the community in the case of police. So
Sure, and we
that'd be my
do that
concern.
fairly regularly with events. I mean, even the ones that have done temporary licenses in the past, we always meet with police and fire both when we evaluate those to determine, again, what's the style of the event, what's the time of day, and then we do an evaluation afterwards if there were any incidents or issues to know if they apply for it the next year, what we need to tweak on our side to make that better. So I feel like we've got a pretty good basis for how to manage that. Essentially what this is, from my perspective, is it's given us the flexibility to do what we've been doing with the temporary license, but it allows that patron to walk out onto the street. I'll give you another nuance very quickly with it. I met with the Bluegrass Museum folks at the end of last week about their grand opening activities, and they certainly are going to have an NQ2 license that they've applied for on their premise. But with that grand opening weekend, kind of a mini romp 2.0, if you want to call it that, and they're anticipating a pretty good crowd. And so we're looking at the streets surrounding their property. But the way the temporary license language is even if the Bluegrass Museum applied for a temporary license that's adjacent to their NQ2, the patron still can't leave their grassy space and walk out onto the street, even though it's the same license holder, because it's a separate type of license. So what the EDC would allow us to do is just to have an agreement with the Bluegrass Museum folks, and we could close St. Elizabeth Street and Veterans Boulevard adjacent to them, and then that becomes part of their premise for the event, which makes it much more fluid for the patron that's coming, whether they're from out of town or a local resident, that could buy that drink from their grassy space listening to music and walk out onto the street to buy, a burrito from Real Hacienda's food truck. Right now, they could not do that, right? Because they would have to take that drink and leave it on the premise. So it gives a lot more flexibility of what we've been trying to do, but I still view it as almost an event by event, like the temporary license that we've been working with over years.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tim.
Gordon, can you weigh in on how the police, have y'all had enough conversation to really understand? And I didn't know your rank, so I'm sorry. I've known you since
Major Gordon Black.
Major Gordon Black.
Yes, sir.
I've known you since you was 12, so I can.
Yes, sir. Look, Mayor, Commissioners, there would be some increased security costs associated with what you see up on the board right now. Think of it, I guess, Tim, that's similar to what the Bluegrass is. If we use that model there and we were policing that would be something similar to the Barbecue festival is what I'm trying to say, I'm sorry. Barbecue festival, you know, so given specific dates and times, there's 20-plus officers working that. Looking at this picture right now, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you know you have Smothers Park. For a Friday after 5, we'll have anywhere from 4 to 10 officers working that event, depending on the band, the popularity, the size of what's going on. So I know the chief has been in some talks with Tim. The traffic unit, the special events unit has been in talks with this. And as Tim said, we won't really know what the cost or what to expect to be until the commission makes the direction or gives the direction they want, and then we could work with him and come up with a plan to go from there. But there will be some increased costs if we do this.
Do you,
for the police department.
you think there's going to be a problem with kind of monitoring it, you know, and wandering around trying to see
Well,
which?
if you look at this, Mayor, can we as a police department stop somebody from walking in with a cooler given an area this big? No, we can't. You know, we would just have to deal with it like we do now on a case-by-case basis. So,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you, Major.
You're welcome, sir.
Yeah, and just to follow up on what Major said is, again, if we go back to the case by cases, I know I keep using that term over and over again, but if we did that, I've talked to Barbecue Fest organizers about the concept a year ago. Said, if we were to be allowed to do this, is that something barbecue would even want to do for their festival weekend? And at the time, the executive board, I think 4 out of the 5 said, no, we don't want that. It's too much liability for us. We don't want the increase in cost. We don't want the increased exposure based on the density of the crowd. We would rather contain it to a certain space rather than let the whole festival area. So if we did a case-by-case basis, now it's with Friday after 5, a much smaller space than what our actual EDC is, because they're just along the riverfront itself. So it's a little bit easier to control. And then some of those costs that when we meet with OPD, and OPD determines based on the size and time, we were going to need an extra 6 officers to monitor that space. Those costs could be then passed on to the event organizer, as opposed to the city just footing the bill for it every Friday or every Saturday, if that makes sense.
That's where I was going. Anybody, Commissioner Condon?
As far as the cost implications and really going through the logistics of who should have a drink in their hand or not, consideration been given to maybe selling the wristbands, which that cost then, or that money then going toward the whole monitoring of the situation, or cups that come from the businesses that allow them to be able to go outside, because if you don't have that color cup or the wristband on, you can't have anything in your hand.
Right.
So how far has that gone, and would that be able to help with offsetting some of that cost?
Yes, we've had some of those discussions. We've not vetted out who would foot the bill for those, whether it was the cops or even how to implement that. For instance, again, so many logistics to it, but if Friday After 5 decided they wanted to do it and you're covering 16 or 17 weeks, depending on the calendar, there's a small portion of folks that would take that cup home and wash it out and bring it back. Pretty small portion, but that's a concern that some people would have, right? So we've had some of those discussions that maybe it's it's a blue cup tumbler for the May events and it's a green one for the June events, and to rotate those through. Some of the restaurants we talked to like the idea, some don't like the idea. They'd rather do wristbands, but they're certainly open to the conversation with that, and that's one of the ways that we looked at it. There's really no way to know for sure whether or not anybody is bringing in a drink, just like if you go to the movie theater. Many people take their popcorn and their snacks and candies in. My folks were down in Florida, and they said, you'd never believe we went to the movies, and they're checking bags just to get in the movie theater now, which I was kind of surprised about. But that's part of what Spectra does at the convention center. They do check bags because they have no outside food and drinks regularly because of some of their liability and the drinks that are on premise. Depending on what the styles, because they have events that crisscross styles of events, right? And they might have something that's more youth-oriented at the same time that they've got open bars with another event. So they're very cautious with what outside drinks are coming into their facility. So we have had those. We've not vetted out the best way to do that yet, or what the consensus is amongst the players, but we have had conversations about that specifically to try to limit drinks coming in.
Thank you, Tim.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Smith-Wright?
Tim, what is the difference in what we are wanting to do and what Newport on the Levee is doing? I mean, are they having problems with people bringing stuff in and doing all of that? Or like Beale Street, what? I don't understand where all this is coming from, because those places have thousands of more people than we do.
Sure.
And they're not saying that somebody's bringing a cooler in. I've never seen anybody walking down Beale Street with a cooler.
Sure.
I think what the things that we're talking about are important. I do think they're important.
Sure.
But I think we're building something up that we haven't even tested the waters yet to see where we're going or how it's going to be, and it's putting a damper on it before we even try it and see what's happening.
Sure. No, I completely understand, and we don't want to do that. We want to be. I understand the goal. You know, in the conversations we had with the commission several years ago, in the CYP group and now the OBKY group. And we want it to be a more progressive city, a more trendy city that folks, especially, you know, some of the millennials, they use that as a calling card of how progressive you are. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to dampen that in any way. But yet, the opinion, I feel like, and the opinion of those that we talk to, is that our downtown riverfront is drastically different than what Beale Street or Bourbon Street are. And the activity that you typically go to Beale Street. Now, granted, you can walk up and down Beale Street in the middle of the day and get some great barbecue. But if you're going there on a Friday or Saturday night, it's just a different feel that you're not taking your kids to the big playground that's along the riverfront. So it's a little bit apples to oranges. And even Newport on the Levee or 4th Street Live, I'm going to experience that restaurant or that band inside that defined space. Whereas our riverfront is, 6 or 7 blocks that has so many different styles of groups that could be happening simultaneously at the same time. So trying to be cautious, to just be careful with how that messaging goes out with the different style groups that are out there. You know, we don't want to raise a bigger red flag, but if it's open container all the time, and the Grads of Buddy Walk's got a few thousand of their folks, they got a tremendous amount of kids and adolescents that are down there at that time. You don't necessarily want a frat party that's drinking on the, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you go to Beale Street, you're not typically going to get the little kids' birthday parties or the little family reunion. It's just a different style of location compared to what our riverfront is, which is very entertaining for a lot of events. But I guess the sense is that we want to be cautious that it doesn't, that the messaging's right on the front side, and that we're progressive but not Bourbon Street.
So we could still apply for the license and figure out all the details afterwards, I assume.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that seems like a logical way to approach it.
About how we would want to, what regulations or what restrictions, or even just from a signage standpoint. You know, the general public loves, we got a lot of comments from folks that love the idea of being more progressive, and thank goodness I could finally be a mellow mushroom and leave and walk down the street to hear the music on Friday night. But we want that messaging to be consistent, that when folks come from out of town, that, what do you mean? I didn't know that I could or I couldn't do that. So,
because you got a lot of children down there Friday after 5 until dark, basically.
Sure.
And the crowd just flips. So I would say we move forward with trying to get the license for the district, and then we just don't have anything until we're comfortable with how it's going to be managed, would be my suggestion. I haven't talked to anybody else on it.
I agree.
I just think don't hold up the process of getting the license by trying to iron out 9 million tweaks.
Sure. And that was our general sense as well, but like I said, we hadn't had an update for the commission in a few months since we've had these meetings with the Home Rule Cities Group and ABC, so we wanted to give you an update and let you know what's possible and get a general direction, which is what we thought it would be.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from anybody?
Okay, thank you.
Good job.
Thanks.
Item number 4, tax increment financing footprint amendment. City Manager Nate Pagan.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Leave your screens up if you would, and Beth is pulling up an exhibit that we'll be referring to here. What you see on your screen is the Gateway Commons TIF on Highway 54. The area in yellow is the current footprint of the TIF as approved by the Commission and by the state. We are proposing to add the areas in pink and the area in blue. The area in blue is additional property that has been acquired by the developer, so he has requested that we add that and incorporate it into the TIF footprint. The area in pink we're proposing to add at the request of the state. As I understand it, the boundary in that area did not coincide with parcel boundaries. So for example, you would have a piece of property that the TIF subdivided, and so you'd have a portion of that property in the TIF, a portion of the property out of the TIF. The state has requested that we clean that up because they don't want to be in a position where they have to prorate a property tax bill, for example, and allocate a certain percentage inside the TIF and a certain percentage outside the TIF. So they asked if the boundary of the TIF would be coterminous or coincide with the boundaries of parcels. So that's the pink cleanup. So we're doing this in consultation with the support of the developer. Our consultants have taken this to Frankfurt to get their general head nod, and so they understand what we're doing and why, because after the commission were to approve this in ordinance, and then we'll have to go to the finance or the economic development cabinet for their approval subsequent to commission approval. But we do understand that they've given kind of a favorable opinion initially, verbally, that they would consider that favorably upon commission approval.
Mr. Gonda?
Curious question, please, Nate. The pink seems to me to be housekeeping, basically just cleaning up
That's exactly
what needs to be
right.
done, correct? The blue is additional property bought by the developer. Is it currently in the city limits or not, or does that need to be annexed? Do you know?
It has been annexed previously, and
It
it's
was,
also
okay.
been incorporated into a developer agreement, incentive agreement, but it was just never added to the actual TIF footprint.
Thank you, sir.
More of a housekeeping measure, really.
Thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Glenn?
Yes. All right, so have we had any conversations with the folks, or are we even allowed to, the Wimsett Court neighborhood? Because with all this development, they are absolutely almost blocked in by what's happening, and it would almost seem to me to get an exit road out, and although it looks like there's a trailing one, it might be worth the time to discuss that with them, either individually or collectively. Have we done that, or is that too early, or what do you think?
I have not. I understand Evan or Wayne can speak to this. I do think there were some conversations about
I thought
that.
Ed had a conversation about
Right,
approaching them.
Back
Yeah.
when, the permits and everything were being issued. So I think, frankly, it's after the fact now. It'd be hard to do potentially, but discussions did take place. Obviously, I was not involved in those, so I could get you an update though.
Okay. And then a certain, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just,
And a certain small business from Germany is excluded out of this, if I'm reading the map correct. You know what are you getting my hint?
That is correct. It is not in the footprint. I believe you're referring to Aldi.
I am, I didn't want, I had no other I should mention that we're not.
Okay, so they were not, because they actually were in existence when the TIF was created, so they
Yeah.
predate the TIF. You will note that it's not, the Aldi location is right now white, which means it's not in the city. The city boundaries are generally in the blue, but we are discussing potential annexation of that property now.
Good.
But it would not be in the TIF. It would be in the city.
It
but
would be
not
in the
within
city, but
TIF
it wouldn't be
footprint,
part of
correct.
the reimbursement zone, okay. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Nate.
okay, so if I remember correctly, which is iffy, is the Wimsett property in the county or the city?
It's in the
county, so we don't have any say over what goes there anyway.
Correct.
Secondarily, and Wayne, and maybe you can, at one time, there was in the project a concrete culvert that was going to be put on the back side of that little subdivision, and it was going to exit out to Hayden Road. Does anybody else remember that, or I just dream it? Is that correct, Wayne? Or Kevin, or Joe Bobby Squeeze Ankle, or whoever wants to talk?
Kevin Collion, city engineer. So there's a road constructed back there now that was built with the Gateway Commons. There's ability to connect. You are correct, it's a county subdivision, so I would leave it to the county if they desire to connect, or the cabinet if they desire to connect when they widen 54. But there is a road that's constructed with the Gateway Commons development behind it.
Behind it, that goes out to Hayden Road.
That's correct, yeah.
And there was the topic was there was a culvert there that was supposed to be included in when they were doing the lights and everything on that 54 thing, and for some reason,
Initially it was an open ditch.
Correct.
So to put the road in, it became piped for the drainage. So there's a continuous concrete pipe that runs underneath the street.
So for us, this is a discussion for fiscal court and not for city, correct?
That's what I think is.
Thank you. Anything else, city manager? Anybody else from the dais? Okay, item number 5, city project list, city manager.
Yes, sir, it's updated information was in your packet, and the staff and I are here for any questions or comments you may have.
Any comments from the dais? Hearing none, I will make a motion to adjourn. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Any discussion about adjourning? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We're done.